What's the most refreshing act of I don't give a f that you've ever seen? In high school, a friend of mine got piss-loaded drunk. I mean, it's a miracle he didn't end up in the hospital. And he didn't have a drive home from the party. So what does he do? He calls the police and says, "Yeah, there's some drunk ducker walking up 3rd Street yelling." And what does he do then? Walks up 3rd Street till they pick him up and drive him to his mother's house. Story 2. Watched a man get half tripped up by an elderly woman while rounding a corner. He dropped his drumstick, ice cream cone, as this happened. He looked at the woman who was apologizing profusely, stared for a few seconds, then pulled another drumstick from his pocket. He then carried on without saying a word to anybody. Story 3. I was at the gym recently and overheard a guy talking on the phone to someone who I presume was his wife. The conversation went something like this. "I just need another 10 or 15 minutes to finish up. Just another 10 or 15 minutes. Just another 10 or 15 minutes. Just another 10 or 15 minutes. Just another... Okay, fine, I'm leaving now." He then hung up and spent the next 10 to 15 minutes finishing up his routine. Story 4. Guy at my work making over 100K is getting crap for something stupid for the last time from this supervisor that nobody likes. Doesn't say anything. Leaves all his crap, gets up, and walks. 2 days later, he's got a raise and doesn't have a supervisor anymore. Commenta. While the sentiment is awesome, there is a fatal flaw. It requires that management/administration/etc. recognizes your value. If they're too dumb to recognize what you do, you're still in the same position as everyone else. Story 5. I love to tell this one because I got to watch it all unfold and because I caused it to an extent. I worked for a call center for a time, and a friend from my original training class was getting tired of it after a couple years. This is a guy for whom life has basically gone. Job, large savings, no job, whittle savings, rinse, repeat. He lives totally minimalistically the whole time. So he came to this job after 2 years of neat life. And to neat life, he was prepared to return, a hearty 3 years worth of savings under his belt. He told me he was tired of the bullcrap and he didn't want to keep working. I liked having a friend at work with his attitude, so I convinced him to instead make them fire him. He agreed and began a very linear scale of laziness. The first week, he began a strict regimen of call avoidance. He would come in, abuse the phone status changes, take maybe one call, go on his first break, come back, take maybe one more call, go on lunch, etc. For a full week, he took 4 or 6 calls a day, and no one said a damn thing. The second week, he took basically no calls. He did a great job of looking busy when important people came by. Somehow, his supervisor did not come to talk to him, and the people who monitored phone stats either overlooked him or were investigating a phone anomaly. The third week was where he really shined. We were responsible for our own timesheets, as represented on the employee website. He would come in at the start of his first break, go on break, take no calls, go on lunch, take no calls, go on break, and leave. But on his timesheet, he put his normal start and end times to get paid for a full workday. The Friday of week 3 is when they finally came for him. I was so proud of my boy when they laid down a piece of Word doc in front of him to sign, stating he would relinquish his pay that he did not earn, which he promptly refused to sign. Since they could not compel him to sign it, the supervisor got irate and walked him then and there. The thing is, if you're fired, you have to have an exit interview. He didn't get one, so they had to call him back in, pay him for his time, and exit interview him properly. And then, of course, he got unemployment to supplement his savings. He did so well, he moved to Colorado. And if anyone is feeling like this company didn't deserve that level of scamming, I'm happy to report. It was Comcast. Story 6. Went to the city court to pay off a ticket. I was upset because the wait was about an hour and a half plus who enjoys paying for a ticket. Finally, my number gets called, and as I sit down at one of the desks, an older man walks in and sees the ridiculous amount of people waiting in the queue. The man says, "Damn it, I'll just go to jail," loud enough for some of us to hear, then walks out of the building. The lady at the desk didn't think it was funny, but it made my day. Commenter. Courts do not duck around. One time, this grumpy old lady finally gets called up to pay her ticket, and the judge asks her how she wants to pay it, and she just keeps responding with all this hilarious, grumpy old lady crap. After a minute of this, she lays down a particularly great line, and everyone in the building starts giggling. Even the judge cracks a smile. And the bailiff immediately turns to the room and says, "That's enough. No laughing." Damn guy, it's just traffic court. Story 7? Saw a kid playing in a mud puddle at a park. The dad was all, "No, buddy, you're gonna get all muddy." The kid slowly sat down in the puddle and reclined in it, dipping the back of his hair in the puddle, then sat up quick, whipping muddy water in the air like a Pantene commercial. That was my son. Story 8. My high school had what was a beauty pageant for senior dudes. It raised money for their prom. It was always in good fun. But one of the competitions was a swimsuit walk, and to keep things from going too far, Speedos were banned. That did not, however, stop one guy from wearing his mom's bikini in front of an auditorium full of classmates and teachers. It was as revealing as one would expect, and I have no idea how nobody stopped him before it was too late. Story 9. This happened years ago. I had just been at a club. This girl I was with, she wasn't a super close friend. We had some mutual friends, so we saw each other a lot, but didn't spend that much time together. Anyways, she had popped some pills earlier and was pretty drunk, and we're walking to the train station because we're on the same line and it's almost 4 a.m. and we are both exhausted. She'd taken off her heels and is walking barefoot in the middle of winter and is talking about the time she broke her arm falling off the monkey bars in school. Suddenly, she decides she wants to hit up this 24-hour burger place on the way to the station. We get there and she buys me a burger because I'm short on cash, but she also buys 5 extra burgers and fries. And at the time, I was teasing her about how much food she bought. Very casually, she mentions that they're for a friend, and when we get to the station, she walks over to a couple of homeless dudes and sits down next to them and starts chatting like they've known each other their whole lives. It was a bit awkward for me. I had never spoken to a homeless person, and these were proper homeless people. Like they smelled pretty bad and were missing half their teeth. They were nice guys, but boy, it was a new experience for me. Anyways, so we're eating burgers with these stinky homeless guys, and then they light up a joint and share it. The fact that she shared a joint with these toothless people really grossed me out, but I stuck around. When our train was only a few minutes away, we said goodbye, and I spied her slipping them some cash after hugging each of them goodbye. We got on our train no problems, and I asked her how on earth she was good friends with random homeless people, and she laughed it off, saying that she usually chills with them when waiting for the train. It was crazy to me. She had done something wonderful for another person, like it was no big deal at all. It really put me in my place when I realized that I would otherwise had never even looked at someone like that. She didn't seem to care at all about the entire exchange, and that moment sticks with me as an example of someone doing something good without needing any kind of validation. Commenter? Seriously, get you some homeless friends. I have one. He went to Vietnam at 15 and came back ducked up. His family is loaded, though. He's homeless all summer, fall, and spring, but his family sends him to rehab every winter. One winter, they couldn't find him, so they asked me to show them where he liked to loiter. 2 super old people, I think his siblings. I say sure, and they take my number for later so they can reach me after my shift. He had hung out by the restaurant I worked at, and they knew of me. He told them he had a friend who got him socks and smokes, and mentioned her, me, having a buzz cut. Anyway, shift ends, and I get a call. They sent some kid in a Tesla to drive me around and look for him. They used me to draw him out, and it worked. I'm walking him back, and he's like, "Did they talk you into this?" "Ah, well, it was fun on the lam, man. Watch this." He spoke like the hippie from that 70s show. We get in the car, and he taps me. So I look back in the mirror, and he starts going off about not wanting to go, and he's faking it all. Finally, he says to the kid, "You put a bounty on me, man. You're the man now. You got the bounty, pay the hunter, man." And other things along these lines. He basically scammed his nephew out of a few $100 for me. We get back to the restaurant, and the old people meet us in another Tesla. I get a few more monies for my help. When I left, he was changing into new winter boots. He also winked at me and told me he'd see me next spring. Rick was a legend. Old Dirty Ricky is still alive. And since you all got me missing him, I called the restaurant and spoke to a buddy that still works there. Rick is less homeless now and has started dating the crazy cat lady. He hates cats. I know this, but he's sweet on her, apparently. Love finds a way. He also chased off a person who had stabbed a person sitting on a bench. He's the man now. Story 10. I used to work on reception of an upscale hotel. We had an elderly, mid-80s, gentleman working as concierge who would spend his shifts chatting away to guests. He was likable and charming and often got away with being a little inappropriate. One day, 2 ladies check in for a spa weekend. As he's walking away, rolling their luggage, I overhear his conversation. He asked them where they were from, and they replied Halifax, his response. "Oh, I once had violent sex with a girl from Halifax, lovely little town." They laughed. Old people can get away with all sorts. Commenter. A bit of shock humor is great as long as you don't take it too far. I think the trick to not coming off creepy is in the way you relate to the topic. Read your audience, and don't delve into detail that isn't necessary. Dropping a quick one-liner about my rubber ducky fetish is one thing, but I feel like it would be crossing a line to start describing it in depth or sharing pictures. Story 11 was on a ferry one day, standing next to a guy on the ledge. Guy was texting, dropped his iPhone into the sea. He just looked over for a second and pulled out some gum from his pocket and chewed on it and continued looking at the islands passing by. I looked at him once and he just shrugged briefly. Commenter, I understand. Back when big screen LCD TVs were still expensive, I came home from work one day to find mine shattered. My ex-girlfriend's 3-year-old son had broken it with a plastic lightsaber on accident, and we had rules about swinging toys around in the living room. I looked at it for a minute and then calmly sent him to his room while his mother eyed me warily. She was ready to beat his ass over it, but I told her that would not be necessary. After he was in his room for a bit, I went back there and explained that we no longer have a TV because he was not following the rules and was not careful, regardless. He lost a couple privileges for a week or two, but mostly I just refrained from buying a new TV for a few months so he could experience the loss. He would ask me about the TV, and I would remind him that he broke it. When we finally did get a new one, he was much more careful. I think it has something to do with the magnitude of the loss. If it were something less important to me, I might have yelled at him or his mother for not watching him. But somehow, it being expensive as it was and how often I used it as a gamer and Netflix addict, made me realize how useless that would be. Skipped past anger straight to acceptance and used it as a teaching moment for the boy. Story 12. I was driving behind a person wearing a hat, driving their convertible with the top down on a nice summer day. For some reason, they leaned their head out the car, and their hat flew right off in the wind. Without missing a beat, they reach over to their passenger seat and put another hat on their head, kept driving like nothing happened. Story 13. At a New England boarding school, there was a kid who can best be described as a modern Mark Twain character, X. He grew up living on a boat, didn't wear escorts to places if he thought he could get away with it, etc. He was expelled just a few days before he graduated, I think for substances use, but possibly one too many alcohol infractions. With nothing to lose, he took off all his clothes and walked stark naked from the dean's office back to his dorm. Story 14. We were at a party in high school, and my buddy is wasted. Some girl comes over and starts yelling at him about him telling his ex-girlfriend to duck off when she was trying to explain why she cheated on him. He calmly stands up, goes over to my friend's refrigerator and starts looking around without speaking. The girl goes, "Are you even listening to me?" from across the kitchen. My buddy then, like a rubber band snapping, pulls out a Kraft Singles piece of cheese and throws it straight at her, and it hits her in the forehead. He walked downstairs to the basement and passed out like 5 minutes later. Story 15. At a high school party where everyone was drinking underage and there was around 90 people, I'll never forget watching the cops pull into the driveway and seeing every single person take off sprinting into the cornfields, rural area with a mile of corn 500 feet from the house. And with everyone sprinting away from the cops, one guy sat in a lawn chair and continued to drink his beer while everyone else was running around. I was watching it from the bed of my truck hiding. Story 16. Went to one of the nicer theaters in town. A cool date night place that most people get moderately dressed up for. Place serves actual food, and it's good food too. Reclining, reserved leather seating, a bar, the whole 9 yards. There was a lady, mid-50s, early 60s, there with her husband. She was in PJs, wrapped in a blanket, carrying a pillow, and having her husband, dressed in khakis and a polo, collect tons of children's candy, and just sits down in her damn cocoon of blankets and snacks. This lady is my inspiration. She gave 0 ducks about how out of place she looked, and just wanted to be comfortable in the theater. It was awesome. Story 17. I worked in a cocktail bar for a while, and a guest was complaining that the drink she got didn't match her preferences. She was being rather rude and condescending, and wouldn't give anyone a direct answer as to what was wrong with the drink. A guest to her right asked, "What did you ask for?" she replied, and the guest, without hesitation, grabbed her drink. He finished it in one chug, looked her straight in the eye, and said, "That's exactly what you described, and it was delicious. Don't be a git." We bought him all of his drinks the rest of the night. Story 18. I worked at a call center for a while to EH, as we all know, is hell on earth. Had a coworker look my dead in the eyes and say, "Thanks for calling Verizon. Go duck yourself," and hung up. He then proceeded to log out for a 2-hour lunch. He came back but was quickly escorted out. Commenter, I have a similar story from my sister who worked for Arby's for a while. One day, the dude on drive-thru gets a text that his buddy is coming by. He sees a car pull up that he thinks is his buddy, gets on the mic and says, "Welcome to Arby's. Go duck yourself." It was not his buddy. Story 19. One day at my old job, my old boss called everybody together because the upper management decided to cut some people out. This old lady overheard it from the bathroom, and then she zoomed out of there, grabbed her stuff, and left before she could get properly fired. She then called the HR to tell them she was getting her paid vacation that was on hold, and hung up the phone before the HR could respond. And she turned off all possible contacts, like cell phone and emails. Then she took 30 days of paid vacation, plus 4 days of paid sick leave, plus 29 days of absence. In my country, the law says you can be absent for 29 straight days without being fired for just cause. When she came back, she was properly fired without just cause and got all benefits like unemployed insurance, etc. Story 20. A few years back, a friend of mine was working retail with me, just moving skids to the floor and stuff like that. At the time, we had a huge hole of a GM constantly demanding more work and a harder hustle, just being a banana in general. Well, my pal was leaving for a new job and was already past his time just helping out with extra work we had when he could have just gone home. Coffee in one hand, pallet jack in another, dragging skids around when our GM stops him and asks him, "Where are you taking that skid?" "Don't warehouse it, put it on a top shelf out in one of the aisles." Essentially what he was asking was for my friend to take maybe 60 plus boxes of small product off a skid and up on a shelf out of reach on the retail floor. And to top it off, he also wanted him to unbox them all first. Literally the most tedious, redundant task you could be doing. My friend just dropped the skid where he was and said, "You do it," and left the building. Story 21. My dad's a pretty reasonable guy, right up until the point where he meets someone who isn't so reasonable. Then he has absolutely no problem sinking to their level just to duck with them. So we're pulling out of the parking lot. I want to say we were at Base Pro, but there was a Chipotle in the same parking lot, and it was lunch rush. So we're pulling out of the parking lot, and a woman was trying to get to Chipotle and was in way more of a hurry than she needed to be. My dad had the right of way, but she tried to sneak in before you came around a corner. I assume she thought he would brake and let her through. He did not. So what we're left with is two cars, her big SUV and his big Ram, which together take up all of the space in this turn. So neither one can get past the other. So she starts honking at him, and he's just giggling. And I mean giggling like a little girl. He thinks this is hilarious that she was being so rude and is now so pissed off. So he starts by waving at her and smiling. It just makes her honk more. Eventually, she just lays on her horn. So naturally, he does the same. From an outside perspective, there are two cars that are now just in a constant song of honk at each other. I asked him what his plan was, and he told me that he was just wasting time until she realized that she could just back up. There was nothing behind her, and she could have gone back at any point in time, but I assume she was so mad that she wanted him to back up instead. Now, like I said, my dad had the right of way, and he will stick to his principles until he dies if he has to, or until he has to pee really bad. We were literally there for close to 10 minutes before she finally backed up, at which point my dad decided he wanted to go the other direction and got out of her way. She started honking at him again. Story 22. Worked as a chef at a place in Sweden, and the head chef was a real git. The dude was on substances most of the time. When he wasn't, he was drunk. So one day the owner had enough after another incident with the waiting staff and just came into the kitchen, yelled at the dude, and told him to go home and never come back. So the head chef just started removing his work clothes right there and then, down until he only had socks, cessports, and underwear on him. He grabbed a bottle of wine standing by the oven, opened it, and walked out the kitchen door out into the actual dining area. He stopped to chug the entire wine bottle in front of the guests, carefully placed it on a table, and walked out. This was midwinter in the northern part of Sweden. He lived about 10 minutes away and didn't own a car. He never said a word to the owner. I never saw him again either. I don't know about refreshing, but I kind of respected his exit. Even though he was an absolute git, thought I'd share it here. I'm so happy to not be working as a chef anymore, because that'd be me in 10, 15 years. Story 23. I was on my way to work one morning last month. It was snowing quite heavily and started to settle on the ground. I drove past a man on his own, probably in his 30s, just skipping down the road, full on arm swinging. The lot. No ducks given. He was glorious. Story 24. Motorcycle rider is out having a ride on a beautiful morning. Vapid dingbat swerves into him, actually contacting his handlebar before noticing that there is a bike there. Rider didn't have time to slow down enough to avoid being hit. He manages to stay on his wheels and the car speeds away. I get to a stoplight and I'm just in time to see our hero ride up to the light, put down his kickstand, walk over and twist the mirror off the car. He drops it on the ground, mounts up, blows the light, no traffic at this time of day on a Sunday, and is gone. Story 25. Once while working at Macy's, I saw a dude using moon cessports as actual cessports. Totally not practical in any way. He was taking big, awkward steps, but was totally rocking it. Story 26. I heard a story from a friend of mine who is an engineer. He was on the site when a new younger supervisor came on site, young guy trying to prove himself, and the young supervisor sees the crane operator reading a book in his crane. It's his break time. They were high up in the building and could see him reading the book. Supervisor asked why he's allowed to do that, and trying to make a point, decided to send the guy home and make a point of him costing the company money to work, not read books, even though he explained he was taking his lunch break. And that's what he enjoys, just reading his book and sipping his coffee. It also doesn't make sense to climb however many feet down for his lunch break. Anyways, the supervisor sends the guy home, and the high-up boss comes on site an hour later and sees the crane operator isn't there. He asks, and the other people explain what happened. Turns out that crane operator is one of 3 people in the country at that time that can operate that crane. Apparently, the supervisor got fired. Crane guy got a raise and is allowed to read his damn book whenever he wants. Story 27. I'm in it, and I was a network administrator for much of my career. I was the new guy on a team of 2, me and the senior network engineer. I had only been on the job a short time, and our employer was planning a massive upgrade of our campus-wide network. Early in the planning, our employer thought our engineer didn't have the experience to handle a project of this size, so they wanted to bring in an outside consultant. Our engineer said this was a waste of time and money. Anyway, at a kickoff meeting, they were laying out the timeline, budget, etc., and we found out that they had contracted the consultant. The engineer asked why, and they told him they thought he couldn't handle a project of this size. He calmly said, "Okay, your consultant can do the whole ducking project by himself," and walked out of the meeting. They then looked at me and asked if I could lead the project. I told them that if they thought he couldn't handle it, there was no way in hell I could. Story 28. I was a cashier at Home Depot, and some customers started giving me sass. I turned around, looked at another cashier and said, "Damn, I have another job to do." And I left. Those people wanted me fired every time they came in. They actually walked up to me and told me, and I'm like, "That's nice. Have a good day," which of course made them angrier. Story 29. I didn't witness this myself, but it's a classic family story. My uncle grew up in East Germany, and as a young doctor was trying to get an apartment of his own. The way things were in the DDR, you could only get an apartment assigned to you by this one bureau. I don't remember what it was called after applying at their office in person. This was all fine and dandy, but my uncle had been applying again and again for several months without success. Once he was feeling particularly fed up with the system. So, being a bit of a fresh hothead after being rejected for the umpteenth time, he proceeded to leave the desk and, in the next hallway, yank down his pants and drop a dump on the floor in the middle of the corridor. Story 30. Good friend of mine ran out of money on a night out, was pretty drunk and didn't fancy the 3-mile walk home in the cold, decided to smear some dirt on his face, and then walked into the local police station and told them he'd been mugged and beaten up. The police took pity on him because he's a little fella and gave him a lift home. Bloke has no shame at all. Story 31. My daughter Ducking loves feeding the army of ducks that live in the golf course behind our house. I try to get her to not to, because bread isn't good for them. One time after I got out of the shower, I saw her out on the back porch feeding the ducks our blueberry bread. I told her to stop and she looked at me and tipped the rest of the bag out to the mouths of what looked like 100 ducks. Story 32. The other day, I saw an old man with his wheelie cart trying to cross the street at a busy intersection. He had the walk signal, but was walking so slowly that the light changed when he was in the middle of the crosswalk. Drivers started honking at him, but instead of hurrying across to the other side, the old man stopped, turned to face the line of cars, and did a little old man dance, blocking traffic until the light changed back. Then he carried on walking like nothing happened. Story 33. I worked at a sushi restaurant that had a really high turnaround rate. The reason why is because one of the owners was a huge git who loved to yell at people. I saw people come and go. Most usually lasted only a few days. There was a sushi chef there that had been there for a while. He was pretty cool and we got along great when we worked together. His girlfriend also worked there as a cashier, and a lot of times they were scheduled together. One Saturday that I was supposed to be off, I get a call from Carol, the git boss, asking me if I could come in. Apparently Max and his girlfriend had had enough of her, and they both just straight up left and walked out of the restaurant. The place was pretty small, so usually it was just the cooks in the back, the sushi chef, and the cashier delivery driver. So when they left, they basically left the place empty aside from the cooks, who did not speak English that well. I decided to take the shift for the extra money, and when I got there, Carol was already there behind the sushi prep area making orders. She usually didn't come in at all on weekends, but would still watch the security cameras occasionally from her laptop at home, and if she saw you standing around doing nothing, she would call and yell at you. It turns out that was exactly what she did to Max and his girlfriend, and they had finally had enough. Carol showed me the security footage of Max yelling at her over the phone, hanging up, then taking off his apron, and both him and his girlfriend flipping of the security camera and walking out. She was showing me because she couldn't believe how disrespectful they were, and how they could just leave the restaurant like that when there were customers in it. Personally, I thought it was pretty badass they walked out together. I know I wanted to quit hundreds of times when I was there, but I was a broke college student that needed the money. Last I heard of them was that they both got jobs at the sushi place that was competing with the restaurant they walked out on. Story 34. Senior year in high school, we had to take a second standardized test, sort of a beta for a future version they were rolling out. Before the testing week, they gathered my class together and told us that no administrators could check our tests, and that we would not be getting individual grades. Instead, how well we did would determine how the test was handled next year. Our class as a whole decided to mark C for every question. They were so proud we finished the test 2 days ahead of schedule. We got Thursday and Friday off that week. The next year, we screwed up their figures so bad, they had to do another beta test. Story 35. We have a coworker that has a garden so big he brings flowers to the office to make space. One time he brought gorgeous, gigantic flowers that are very hard to tend, and I asked him how he grew them. Well, my flowers are like me. They just grow when they're happy. The bloke is 80. He's retiring next week. Story 36. Several years ago when I was in college, I was at one of the approved smoking sections of the campus. I went to having a cigarette. A guy I recognized from one of my classes who was also there. Smoking got an important phone call, so he moved to the edge of the approved area to talk in privacy. One of the campus security guards, who was notorious for having a superiority complex, happened to be walking by at this time and told him to get back in the approved smoking area, which he was hardly 6 inches away from. The guy refused and politely tried to explain that the call was very important, personal, and he didn't want anyone else to hear. The security guard continued hassling him to get back in the approved area. This went back and forth for about half a minute or so. The guy finally got frustrated and said, "Dude, blow me." The security guard, very surprised, sneakily responded, "Excuse me, what was that you said, baloney?" And the guy yelled, "No, I said blow me, you ducking a hole," really loud. The security guard's eyes got big and he stood there for a few seconds, then quickly walked away without saying anything. It turned out dude's mom was hit by a car the day before and was getting an update from the hospital about her condition. Story 37. My grandmother is 88. Her dad died when she was very young, and as it was during the Depression and a single woman couldn't support 4 kids, she and her sibling were put into a children's home for most of their childhood. Her sister is a couple of years older, and as her only family, her brothers were on the boys' side and they rarely saw them, took on a mothering role with her that never really stopped when they got older. My grandma loves her sister, but avoided her as they got older because it was annoying to be bossed around when she was a mother, then grandmother. My grandpa passed away a month ago, and at the funeral, my grandma was chatting to some friends. My aunt decided it was time to go upstairs and told my grandma so. For the first time ever, Grandma turned to her and said, "You have been ordering me around for my entire life. Well, not today," and turned back to her conversation. It took her 83 years, but she finally stopped caring and told her big sister off. I guess losing the love of your life after 70 years takes all of your ducks away. Story 38. It wasn't me, but my wife who spotted this legend. At this time, she was visiting Paris. She was enjoying a nice summer walk near Hotel de Ville, the main council building in France. There she spies a homeless guy. Normal, right? Wrong. There was this dude full-on bathing in a fountain in the heat of the day with a napkin dot across his forehead. On the side next to him was a checkered cloth with a wine bottle and a single wine glass. The most French homeless dude ever. Story 39. I went to a fairly strict Catholic high school and we had to wear uniforms except for 1 or 2 days a year that were free dress. The student body there was mostly Caucasian, but there was one cool senior guy that was Asian. I don't remember his name or actual heritage, plus I was a lowly sophomore. For free dress day, he wore a shirt that said, "Ancient Chinese proverb," then it had 3 vertical lines of Chinese characters. I happened to be in line behind him at lunch and must have been leaning my head because if you turned your head and read the shirt from the side, it said, "Damn this crap." That guy is still my hero. Story 40. I'm not really sure if it counts because it was me. But anyway, I happened to have the displeasure of working at the local Walmart. I'm a cashier and I had been working for 9 hours and I got off at 10 p.m. So most people know that the light being on above a register means it's open, right? So here I am doing my happy, or I guess not so happy thing, checking people out. At 9:55, I go ahead and shut my light out and have my current customer put my close sign at the end of my belt and continue like normal. But this is Walmart. People are freaking idiots, so people continue to just come through. Some people even pointing at the sign and chuckling. And after about 15 minutes, 10:10, at this point my CSM came up just telling me to finish up my line and go home. 10 more minutes go by and I'm finally done. And some idiot comes back down my line and unloads their damn cart. So I did the only logical thing. I took my badge off and left as this uncultured ass yells at me as I'm walking to the back to clock of. Not a single duck was given. I hate my job. Story 41. I worked at a major movie theater chain at the mall just up the road. I has cross-trained, taken, and swapped shifts. Tried to be flexible as this type of job has a high turnover rate with students. I requested my birthday off well in advance. Mind you, I've been getting crap shifts since doing back bar, double kloppens kind of crap. Week of comes around. Despite being granted my already approved time off, they have me working double shifts. I talk to the manager and shift scheduler. They say they'll fix it. They give me a completely off day off, but I'm still scheduled hard for my B-day. I looked her right in the eyes and just said, "Okay, I quit." Never went back. Story 42. My husband and I were in the car getting on the freeway in Brooklyn along with 2 other lanes of cars, and we honked at a man who was blatantly and slowly jaywalking right before the freeway entrance. The man lifted his head up, looked my husband dead in the eye, and slowly, but surely, raised a steady middle finger at us as he continued to jaywalk across 3 lanes of traffic. We burst out laughing on the freeway. Had to admire the dude for his absolute lack of ducks given. Story 43. I was in high school in the 90s and a friend of mine named Devin started dating the ex-girlfriend of another guy. The former BF was jealous and during lunch a few days later came up while I, my friend, and his new GF were eating lunch and just punched him right across the face. It was a solid hit and Devin was knocked right off his seat and onto the floor, spilling our drinks and most of our lunches in the process. He shook it off, got up, completely ignoring the ex, turned to his girlfriend and said, "I'm getting another drink. Do you want one too?" Story 44. In my calculus class in college, half the class just stopped coming after the second exam, past the drop deadline, past the withdraw deadline. 42 students just said, "Damn this, we're out." Now to be completely transparent, our professor was, and a whole who was retiring in a month. It was nice seeing my classmates' Saya collective. I wish I had done the same. Story 45. I was at Walmart a few weeks ago. My husband and I came shopping at like 11 p.m. just to avoid the rush since it was Alabama on a game night. Well, turns out 11 p.m. wasn't quite late enough. We had to wait in checkout lane for half an hour. There were easily 100 people at one point, only 4 lanes open, and the line was halfway back through groceries. You'd think it was Black Friday. Well, we're standing there, and all of a sudden, a cashier hands the person in front of us their receipt and takes off their vest and throws it on the ground and just yells at the top of her lungs, "Damn this crap! I graduate from beauty school next week. I don't need this," and walks towards the back of the store to go get her things and leave. Story 46. My dad will get piss drunk off of Fatorade, as he calls it, typically red Gatorade and vodka. This usually happens when we're at the river or Lake Havasu. He'll start at the front of the boat, chug the remaining Fatorade, then stumble to the back of the boat looking for a life jacket. He throws it on, not how you normally would, but he flips it upside down and puts them on like you would with whitey tighties. He calls it the diaper. He'll then get in the water and float there for about an hour, letting you know every time he's peeing in the water. Story 47. A sergeant in the army was making a Latin soldier do push-ups for screwing up. The soldier said he was going to file an EO complaint because this was discrimination. It wasn't. The sergeant pulled off his name tape from his chest and threw it at the soldier and said, "Make sure they spell my damn name right." Story 48. When I lived in the UK during high school, I was located on 2 separate military facilities. While the school was pretty much the same curriculum as a normal public school, it was also a Department of Defense school, so it could be super conservative in many ways. I was not a great student, but I got along with almost everyone. I mainly identified with anyone who was a bit of an outsider. So this is about, let's call him Greg. This kid was brilliant. I'm talking like the school had to bring in specialists in maths and science to keep up with him. He was also super nice, social, didn't seem at all spectrumy. He was definitely on a fast track to full ride university, perhaps all the way through his PhD, post-IB level, extracurriculars. Anyhow, he was cool, very nerdy, and lived on the same block as me, on a much smaller base from where we went to HS. He only made one stink during our junior and senior year. He loved his hat. It was a golf cap. He wore it every day. It was dingy and stained, and he damn loved it. So for whatever incredibly stupid reason, admin decided Greg was in dress code violation. Keep in mind this was by now senior year, so he had been wearing it for over a year, 1/2 with no issues. He had never had any disciplinary issues whatsoever. No tardies, perfect attendance, the whole 9, you know? He refused to stop wearing his hat and started getting dinged for dress code. This pissed me off and I felt like he was being bullied. I despise bullies. I let him know that I had his back and if admin wanted to fight about dress code, I had something for them. So I started borrowing dresses and skirts from my lady friends. For a week, I wore dresses and skirts with combat boots, torn stockings, cut-up jeans exposing my underwear, mesh tops, tees with weed leaves on them, etc. You see, I didn't have anything to lose academically. I was already on house arrest. 94, 95. But Greg could have had a vindictive staff derail all of his amazing work because of a hat. A hat. Many other students also began violating dress code to the point where it wasn't possible for staff to keep up, and Greg was never messed with for that damn hat ever again. He graduated top of our class. Story 49. My coworker and I were called into a random HR meeting. Turns out we and quite a few others were chosen to involuntarily resign our positions. Laid off. The HR person left the office for a few minutes to go get some additional paperwork, and we both high-fived when the door closed. We'd already been lining up our own exits, but instead got paid to leave. People were sad to see us go, but we laughed and went and had lunch, and a nice unplanned vacation. Story 50. There's a panhandler who works the exit of a nearby strip plaza, right next to a sign that says no loitering, no soliciting, no panhandling. They don't enforce it because he's respectful. The community loves him. And he turns around and spends the money he collects at the very same strip plaza. Story 51. Engineer was getting a lot of pressure put on him, lots of it the last couple of months. Had a meeting and was getting bombarded with questions and a lot of hostile comments from management. He stopped for a few seconds and said, "I am out of here," and walked out of the meeting. The project came to a screeching halt, which lasted 2 months until people came up to speed. Story 52. Had a teacher once tell a story about a certain day in her life, where she wrote a note for her kids to bring to their teacher saying, "I'm sorry my kids are late for school today. Their house accidentally burned down this morning." That was to me some next-level optimism or something. It sounded so weird to me, it was funny. Can't quite figure it out if sending them off to school after such a thing was a good or a bad thing or whatever. But this woman, my teacher, in question was in any case very energetic and often optimistic, so maybe in that case it was a good thing. As in, yeah, crap happens, don't worry about it, have fun at school. We'll figure this out when you get home. Story 53. A few years ago, a friend of mine was going through emotional breakdown. He spent one of his nights driving around drinking Jack out of the bottle. Apparently, he passed a police car taking radar. The cop didn't pull him over, so he decides he needs to go into the police station to file a complaint that their officers aren't pulling drunk people over and that he's the proof. Story 54? This was a few years ago, but I'll always remember this. I went to my diacussion section for my math class at my school. There wasn't a seating chart or anything, but nearly everyone always sat in the same seat every week. There was this student who came in a couple minutes late to class, and when he approached the seat, he usually sat in and saw someone sitting in there. He quickly made a U-turn and walked out of class, and class went on as normal. The next week, he came in 5 minutes early to class. Story 55. I had a call center job, and a lady was yelling about a fairly minor issue. I tried explaining it once, and she kept howling off, so I just said, "Okay, you're too excited," and hung up. Story 56. I was on a cruise with my family, and on one of the ports of call in Italy, I went on a bus tour with my mom. I can't really recall the city area exactly, but we spent a lot of time on the motor coach. After several hours, we finally made a rest stop where there were public restrooms. They were not super modern, but adequate. The only issue was that there were like 2 stall restrooms, and the majority of the people on the tour were women. My mother got in line and I went into the men's room where I was the only one in there. No other men needed to use it. When I came out, I noticed the line for the ladies hadn't moved. I said to my mom and the others, "Why don't some of you go in here?" The men's. "It's empty and I will watch to make sure no guys come." All the women looked at me like I had 3 heads. However, my mom said, "I'm doing it," and went in. Still more scoffs from the others. No guys came, but they decided to stay waiting in the long line. Story 57. A kid, 7 broke into the computer lab to play games. When asked by the teacher if he'd like her to call the cops and report a break-in, he said that she should instead call a lock person to install better locks. Story 58. I am sitting in a lecture. See the guy in front of me open the course page on the university website. He goes to the options menu and selects Drop Course. He then closes his laptop and walks out. Story 59. In 8th grade, we had a decrepit old teacher who would throw a chalkboard eraser at any kid who fell asleep in class. He was smart enough to only pick on the kids whose parents probably wouldn't care if a teacher assaulted him. In my class, Tommy was the sleepy kid who had to wake up early to work on the family farm. Tommy starters collecting erasers one at a time. When he had a stockpile, he dragged them through the chalk trays until they were solid white. Tommy fell asleep. Teacher pinged him with an eraser. Tommy reared up and started hammering the old man with eraser after eraser until he took cover behind his desk. Whole front of the room was a cloud of dust. Half of us were choking and coughing. Tommy stood up, pulled on his leather jacket, and perfectly composed, headed for the door. Teacher tried to grab his arm, and Tommy held up both birds at shoulder level and kept walking. Left for the day. Next day was right back in his seat like nothing happened. And nothing ever did. Story 60. I had a chemistry teacher in high school who was told ahead of time that she wasn't going to be offered a contract next year with the school. It was like January or something. She started teaching the way she wanted to, cussing, and just being an awesome teacher. Whenever someone would ask her why she did that, she'd respond, "What are they going to do? Fire me?" Story 61. I think dogs display this the best. They give so little a duck that they don't even notice when they're in pain. My dog had to have a large portion of his paw surgically removed, and you'd never know it. He just went around like normal, hobbling with a big cone around his head. He had the same goofy smile, except he'd crash into furniture and knock everything over. Story 62. I was the second fattest kid in school. The fattest kid was crazy fat, like 300 plus at age 17. He was pretty nondescript, got some crap about being fat. Whatever. I remember seeing him at prom and being a little surprised that he had a date, and then I saw him on the dance floor. Story 63. When I lived near Perth, I was in a place with no aircon and 115 heat that summer. I spent a lot of time in parks and at the beach when I wasn't working, just because going home was kind of torture. Most afternoons, I'd grab a book and go read on the closest beach until it cooled off enough to go home. There was a girl there. She was a heavy girl, dark hair, conservative swimsuit, and she'd always showed up with some beach speakers and would just kind of chill and listen. I noticed her, but not much. But then one day, she just stood up and started dancing to her music, totally alone, on a relatively busy beach. She had this huge smile on her face and was just cutting loose. She stayed until sunset, then got down and prayed towards Mecca. Then when she was done, she got up and danced some more. It was cool enough to go home by then, so off I went. I never saw her again on the beach after that. I've always wondered what made her want to dance all alone, looking so happy, and then never return. It didn't seem like she gave a damn she was on a busy beach. Now when I think of happiness I want to achieve, I remember how she looked dancing on that beach. Story 64. So in my younger years, I was slightly reckless with my 1996 Toyota Tercel. Really enjoyed my handbrake a bit too much in the snow. So we had a decent amount of snowfall that day, and I'd always go to an abandoned lot near my house. It was basically a parking lot with a small structure in the middle. I was thinking I would impress so with my awesome handbrake turns, I hit the parking lot at about 50 kph and drift around the empty structure. We swing around the building completely sideways, and once we clear the corner, lo and behold, there was a cop sitting in his squad car. Our eyes lock as a slide around him. Complete and utter fear kicks in. Knowing it's stupid as duck to run from police, I let the car slide to a stop and await my fate, pretty sure I'm about to get reamed. At this point, my girlfriend just hangs her head in shame and gives it a disappointing shake. Cop pulls up along my window but doesn't get out. We both lower windows. You come here often and do that? No, sir. I just thought I'd have a bit of fun in the snow. He asked me if my car is in good shape and well looked after. Tell him yes, of course. In the most refreshing act of I don't give a duck, he says. Yeah, I do it all the time when no one is looking. Just be careful. Get out of here now before someone notices. I was blown away. Didn't even ask to see my license or anything. I say thank you and calmly drive away. Super chill cop. Was awesome. 10/10 would drift around cop again. Story 65. Saw a couple of young kids swimming in the large pond at the town center of our development. I called out, "Hey, there's a huge gator that lives in there. Get out of the water." To which the kids replied, "We ain't afraid of no gator," as they were backstroking out toward the middle of the pond. Story 66. Was waiting for my food in McDonald's the other day when this curbside pickup guy comes walking in complaining really loudly about the wait time. He asks for a manager and says, "I've waited over 15 minutes since I placed my order." To which the manager says directly to his face, "I was the one who put in your order and I haven't been on the clock for 15 minutes yet, so how's that possible?" Guy just walked out storming. Story 67. A few years ago, I lived with two roommates at this apartment that had this amazing, huge private rooftop on the 5th floor overlooking a busy street in NYC. One 4th of July, I threw a party, and the word got out quick that there was a private rooftop party. So from the 20 people I expected, over 100 showed up. I didn't recognize most of them. By the end of the night, this guy comes up to me and starts telling me very casually how he couldn't find the bathroom. So he just peed over the edge of the roof into the busy street, which included an outdoor restaurant downstairs. Then he proceeds to ask me how I found out about this party. I told him that it was my apartment and I was actually the host. He looked at me for about 2 seconds and then said, "Oh, well, I just peed over your roof. Nice to meet you." Story 68. I was once standing in line at a Stripes, which is a dry cleaning service found on Army bases. There was a specialist in front of me, and his patch identified him as part of the 75th Ranger Regiment. His pants were unbloused and one of his boots was untied. A captain was behind me and noticed the disheveled soldier, so he decided to correct him. "Excuse me, specialist. It looks like your boot is untied and your pants became unbloused." He was polite, but it was clear that his assumption was that the outranked, enlisted soldier would fix himself. Instead, the soldier, arms crossed, looked him dead in the eye, looked down at his boots, looked back to the captain, said, "Okay," and turned back around. The captain was so visibly flustered, apparently not used to just being ignored by an enlisted soldier, that he just left. Story 69. I reported this 6 months ago, but it's worth mentioning again. There is a small bridge in my neighborhood with a clear sign showing which side has the right of way. One day, cars were approaching from opposite sides, and the driver from the wrong side felt she should have the right of way for whatever imaginary reason. She stopped on the middle of the bridge, honked her horn, and gestured the other car had to back up, even though the sign clearly stated he had the right of way. The other driver did not even blink. He did not honk. He did not gesture. He just grabbed his newspaper beside him, opened it, and started to read. The first driver fumed and hissed and honked, but there was nothing she could do but back up and let the other driver pass. It was beautiful. Story 70? Last night at a bar, this really douchey-looking guy approached one of my best friends. She's in a relationship, and this random guy is the full banana head. He tried to dance on her, and after several attempts to get with her, he lifts his shirt to expose his muscles and neck-shoulder tattoo pieces. With his shirt lifted up over his chest, My friend Lauren took one look, grabbed him by his shirt and pulled up it over his head so he was stuck, and just walked away. Not a single duck given. Story 71. Worked in an office for a bit. There was a manager who everyone liked, staff all the way up to the boss. He's been there forever, but never made it past the first tier of management because he wasn't a cutthroat hole. Basically, a mandatory requirement to get to a high level for that company, but he'd been there so long and had survived so many attempted disciplinary hearings that he was basically immune to getting fired. There's a female manager a couple of tiers higher than him who everyone suspected had slept her way to the top. She'd been crap at her job when she was hired. She was crap as a first-tier manager. She was also the youngest promotion to that rank and had gotten there faster than anyone else in the company via internal promotion. There was a manager's meeting. She suggested a really bad idea. He just talked past it like it wasn't there. She pulled him on his manners in front of some 20, 30 managers, including folks higher than her on the ladder. He casually just replied, "I'm sorry, I can't hear you over the sound of you having sex your way to the top." She tried to get him fired. He's still there, and to boot her ascendancy through the ranks has stalled, because her new boss is now a woman, and he couldn't be enjoying it more. Story 72. There was this one crazy, homeless-looking dude that used to work out in our 24-hour gym. He would always just kind of talk to himself and do his thing. One day I go to get a drink of water, and I walk past him. He's on one of the back machines where you squat down onto the chair and reach forward for these wide bars in front of you and use your own body weight to pull you forward. When you pull back on the bars, it thrusts your seated half forward. So as I walk by, I hear a moaning and I look to see this guy doing the hump move with this machine. He's going at it, literally ducking this machine. Slow, rhythmic thrusts, and he's moaning in unison. He got loud, and to my amazement, they didn't stop him. I'm pretty sure he finished because he sped up and sounded like he climaxed and all. The gym was full, too. I never felt comfortable using that machine again. Story 73. One night it was pissing down with rain, so much that the roads were just rivers of water flow and surface water, which was seriously a bummer. But then suddenly the rain stopped and the temperature dropped dramatically. It dropped by like 10°C, causing all the water on the roads to freeze, turning the slippy road rivers into ice rinks. I woke up thinking to myself, "Oh crap, well, this will be fun today." As I'm saying this to myself, I see a man in his 40s who has lived in my street for 10 years or so and has every day walked to get a bus to work, sliding down the road in his suit with his briefcase in hand, as if he were ice skating, looking like he was having the time of his life. Here I was moaning about the ice, and this guy comes along at full glee. Made my day. Story 74. Back in high school, my buddy and I were in the same geometry class. My buddy was in a band and really didn't give a duck about HS. He would sleep during our class almost every day. One day during roll call, our teacher finally got sick of it and said, "Friend's name, why don't you just drop out and go be a rock star with your band?" My buddy lifts his head up, looks at the teacher and says nothing, then puts his head down and continues taking his nap. Next day during roll call, my buddy is not at his desk. The look on our teacher's face when we told him that he dropped out was priceless. He was freaking out because he was convinced he ruined this kid's life. Since that day, my buddy has been a successful vocalist with a handful of different bands, made it through multiple rounds of American Idol, and is enjoying his life without a HS diploma. Story 75. I told my boss after she reprimanded me in front of the office that she is unprofessional, and if she has an issue, yelling in front of an entire office is not the way to do it after 9 months of taking her B's. She ran out and then 15 months later demanded I go into her office. I didn't care anymore, and she said, "Do you want this job?" I said, "Only if you respect me. I won't be bullied anymore by you." She got so red in the face with anger and was shaking. I just didn't care anymore, and she kept yelling nonsense, so I walked out. Never felt so good. My mom was dying, so I had no energy to deal with a raging git of a boss anymore. Story 76. There's a for fun question board at work, and right now the question is, what's your favorite April Fool's Day prank? Some of the answers written up there right now include my paycheck and getting offered a job here. Story 77. I was talking to a friend on his break from work, and his boss interrupted and told him his break was over. My friend yelled, "Duck you!" He was fired and had not had the most successful life since. Still, it was a great moment to witness, and I still laugh thinking about it 15 years later. Story 78. Dude got kicked out of the Marines. Bad conduct discharge. He deserved the ruling. Dude was a piece of crap, and the thing he got kicked out for, he did actually do. Just the last in a long line of ducking up. Anyways, the dude was belligerent as crap. They'd taken his ID and were about to escort him off base when the battalion co said he wanted to talk to him first. Bad idea. Dude, in uniform, has already taken off his tie and unbuttoned his shirt like he'd been fired from Kinko's. He walks into the Cole's office with his attitude. Yeah, what? The Cole says, Excuse me? First off, I'm the commanding officer here. Why are you not at the position of attention? And the proper form of address is Sir, recently discharged guy. Well, actually, I'm a civilian now, so shouldn't you be calling me sir? Story 79. My GF's 70-year-old Russian dad wearing pink track pants and an 80s Dayglow multicolor ski jacket and sandals to go shopping. His daughter buys him nice things. He has money, he has a closet full of nice clothes, but he literally doesn't give a duck. I think it's pretty cool. Right on, old dude. Right on. Story 80. Pizza place on SB Sunday with my dad when I was a lad. Line was out the door and into the parking lot. The whole reason we were there is because my dad picked carryout instead of delivery by accident. Anyway, there's a place that has ice cream next door. So the other kids with their parents were running around with ice cream cones. One of them starts throwing a temper tantrum over wanting to go home and chucks his cone, hitting a lady in line in the side of the head. Silence washes over the establishment as we all wait for this chick to get unhinged. Nope. It's like she didn't even notice. She's up next and picks up her 3 pizzas, then walks out, but not before taking a melting scoop off her shoulder and throwing it at the kid. Story 81. In around 7th grade, the teacher had this yoga ball that came with a chair that you could wheel around in. Every day, the chair would be passed around to different people. So basically, when it was this one classmate's turn, I don't remember the exact reason, he decided to go wheel out of the classroom and at full speed, barreled through the hallway whooping. We also had this very strict librarian, and she was at the other end of the hallway, so she caught him in the middle of him rolling away, and instead of stopping, he just passes her and, runs downstairs, yoga ball and all. The whole class was laughing hysterically because of how stupid the whole situation was. We could hear the librarian yelling, "Stop, stop!" Story 82. Last year, we had some neighborhood kids, a couple of dudes and a girl, all in their late teens, get into a knockdown, drag-out fight right in front of our house. My wife and me are out there checking out the garden and whatnot at the time. Once this fight commences, my wife tells me, "Turn on the water." I comply, and she proceeds to wet them down like a couple of fighting dogs. It broke the fight up. A couple of the kids showed up at our door that night to apologize for the ruckus. I was just glad that nobody was armed that day. Story 83. Work at a hotel. Got asked to deliver bottles of water to a guest in a room. Knocked on the door, a naked lady answered the door. Not that surprising, really. Handed over the water, and her husband and their 2 friends, also naked, appeared in the background. They didn't give a duck. They were having a good time. Story 84. One of my coworkers was on his way out. Got a new job. Our boss is kind of a banana on a professional level. Well, I guess he needed some kind of signed letter saying that one of his employees was resigning on short notice, which has never happened before. We've had plenty of people quit. Anyway, on his last day, our branch manager saw him go into the bathroom, and while he was pissing, our manager told him he needed the paper signed ASAP. Ryan, the guy quitting, pulls it out while pissing and drops it in the urinal. Clocked out and haven't seen him since. Story 85. I remember back in high school, there was this one kid, the class redneck. Not one of those fake wannabe rednecks either. He was always arguing with teachers, blowing off work, and had that duck you, I do what I want sort of attitude. He really didn't give a crap about high school or graduating. He dropped out of high school, and later on, I found out he went on to become an underwater welder in the Arctic. Dude's already making more than me, busting my ass in college to become an engineer. Story 86. I work as a bartender at a restaurant. Last weekend, I had a group at the bar, 2 sisters, late 20s, their parents, and their aunt. It's kind of a trendy place, so just ordering seemed stressful enough, mostly for the younger girls. One girl is sat next to the aunt, who is clearly grilling her about her career, love life, etc. At one point, the aunt asks a question, and there's a pause. The girl says, "I just don't have the energy to talk right now." Silence. Good for you, girl. Story 87. I'm at the post office waiting in this huge queue to pay some bills. It's the day that pension is paid, so the line is filled with about 50 people trying to cash their pension. This guy walks in, bathrobe and slippers, and a 1,000-mile stare, avoids the queue and goes straight for the counter to get his pension. Walks out again in 2 minutes. No one complains. Story 88. Friend and I went to bar. Had a small dance floor, maybe 20 to 30 single females in the bar. He asked every single one to dance. They all turned him down. I said, "Looks like you were pretty well shut down." His reply, "Not yet. I am going to start over. A legend in his time.